Good morning and welcome to the fourth lecture in our public theology series this academic year. These lectures are intended to assist the Garrett-Evangelical theological community, did I do that in the right, yes, the right order, in understanding more about the intersection of theological and ethical perspectives and values with the needs of the world as we continue to prepare graduates who are equipped to be civically engaged, serving the well-being of all persons and creation. We have recently received findings from the feasibility study we undertook last fall regarding our interest in public theology and in an institutionally wide initiative. I am very pleased to report the findings strongly confirm excitement, interest, and broad support for this initiative. There is a desire across the board to own it. Our Public Theology Task Force will receive the report shortly, and then we will begin to engage a way of sharing these results with the community and to determine next steps. In the meantime, the President's Office continues to sponsor this year's Public Theology Lecture Series in honor of the celebration of the 45th anniversary of the Center for the Church and the Black Experience. As we know, the events of Ferguson 2014 and the continuing violence against personhood and the bodies of our Black brothers and sisters resulted in the Black Lives Matter movement and a new kind of civil rights activism in our country. In just a moment, Dr. Stephen Ray will introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Gregory Ellison, but let me first just add a personal word of welcome to our friend and colleague, Gregory. It is great to have you back on campus again. We're very excited about your lecture. We look forward to it and to the dialogue we'll have with you at lunch afterwards. Thank you for coming. Dr. Ray.
So I have the distinct, rare privilege and honor of introducing the Reverend Dr. Gregory C. Ellison II. It is particularly an honor because I met the Reverend Dr. Gregory C. Ellison II when he was still in the midst of writing his dissertation and wondering what sort of world he would be thrust into. Well, I'm happy to report, Dr. Ellison, it has been a world that has received your work gladly. Dr. Ellison is currently on the faculty at Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and his position is Associate Professor of Pastoral Care and Counseling. His teaching draws primarily from his work with the organization he founded called Fields Dialogues, a nonprofit organization that creates unique spaces for unlikely partners to have heartfelt conversations on taboo subjects like racism, classism, and community violence. The book, which you should have in your library by the end of this week, if you intend to actually be deemed someone who takes seriously cutting-edge scholarship, is Cut Dead But Still Alive, Caring for African-American Young Men. Now I'm just going to take a moment because you all came to hear him and not me, but the thing I do want you to understand is the significance of his work. A part of one of the major challenges that has faced both the Black church as well as the Black Academy and the larger academy more generally is how to take seriously the lives of those young Black men who were demonized in the 1980s, 90s, and turn of the century in such a way that they only exist in the public imagination as thugs who ought to be either warehoused or expunged. And Dr. Ellison's work has been significantly focusing on how it is that pastoral care is provided to those who exist only in the public imagination as that which is anathema and needs to be gotten rid of. And so a significant thrust of his work and a significant contribution is that he has taken seriously and answered seriously the dictum which comes to us from Matthew 25. So as ye have done unto the least of these, my brethren, and here you can put in parentheses, demonized young black men who God believes are actually more than thugs, as you have done unto the least of these, so also have you done unto me. So with that, I introduce the Reverend Dr. Gregory C. Ellison II.
Well, it's good to finally see you. It's good to finally see you. And whenever I have the opportunity to stand before God's people, I just take a moment and look every single person in the room in the eye. Whether it's 5 people, 500 people, or 5,000 people, that takes a little longer. But I look every single person in the eye and I say, it's good to finally see you. And it sounds a little weird. And I say this for 2 reasons. The first is, I say it's good to finally see you. Because Dr. Rector invited me sometime last year, several months ago, to join you in this space. And for several months, I've been thinking about this space and praying about who the people might be and what they might bring to this space. I've been praying for you for many months now, so it's good to finally see you. But I also say it's good to see you because, as Dr. Ray has alluded in his introduction, I know full well what it means to be unseen. So we got some work to do. I need to ask your permission. Sometimes it's better just to do it and feel the pain afterwards. But I wear these hats for a reason. I shared with our brother Luis yesterday. My grandfather had a 4th grade education. He wore hats every day. So I promised him that I would take him with me everywhere I went. That's why I wear these hats. So is it okay? I know we in chapel, but you know, Grandpa's with us. All right, we got some work to do. Conversations with Country Dog. And for the next several moments, I'd like to talk with you about some of the evolution of my thinking, of my being, as I've worked not only with fearless dialogues, but had some amazing and transformative encounters with people in community spaces and in my past. We'll start with my grandmother. My grandmother is, I believe, the master teacher at creating space. On April 6, 2015, Francina Watts Ellison exhaled one last time in her 97th year. But prior to her passing, I took for granted the deep impress that she had on my own pedagogy. But now, as she has joined the cloud of ancestors, I'm ruthlessly aware of the many ways that Grandma's wisdom frames my teaching and community conversations, in university classrooms and sanctuary pulpits. Though her formal education ended in high school, Grandma was a top-flight professor. She believed that hard conversations rarely emerged in sterile environments. So when I expressed the need to share my truth, something else was always at play. With upturned dirt under our nails and flowers blooming at our knees and tears flowing from my eyes, Grandma and I talked about the isolation of being pedestal bound. I remember in college, I was in her kitchen in Kansas City, Missouri. And she was humming a hymn. And she told me, baby, go stir the pot. And as I was stirring the pot, I felt the warmth of her heart, and my eyes began to well. And I said, Grandma, I need to confess to you. My HIV test is negative. In Grandma's company, no subject was taboo. And there was always something else at play, creating a space for transformative conversation. And as I began to think about this work of creating spaces for hard, heartfelt conversations, Grandma continued to speak to me from the cloud. So in this lecture, I'll draw upon Grandma's wisdom, the sacramental vision of Barbara Brown Taylor, and a host of diverse thinkers to give you my formula for creating space. For we are in a time where people stand on different sides of the aisles, of different sides of redlining, of different sides of politics, but rarely do conversations happen about subjects that matter between unlikely partners. So how, as a community, do we bring these folks together? It takes great intentionality to create a space for strangers to talk. So, I could formulaically chart out the ways that we do this at Fearless Dialogues, and I'll share more about what Fearless Dialogues is in our lecture. But I balk at that impulse for two reasons. The first is creating space is as much of an art as it is a science. And we'll talk about the science of it. But I also want you to experience the art. So I'd like to welcome you to what we call the laboratory of discovery. And in this space, I'm going to ask that you would awaken your senses, that you would allow your inner teacher. Each of us has an inner guide. Carl Jung calls it the diamond, right? And I'm asking that you call upon those resources and that you would hear those who are screaming from the shadows, that you would see those who are hidden in plain view. Listen deeply. Hear with intention. Feel with all of your senses. Are y'all ready? I'm a Baptist preacher. Y'all scared? Y'all scared? Okay. Thank you, Miss Elisa. Conversations with Country Dark. I'm going to ask that our friends would lower the lights and that you would allow your inner teacher to be your guide. This is the opening of the 4th chapter of the Fearless Dialogues book that I'm writing now. Hear, feel, see. My city-fied eyes were unprepared for Country Dark. Under the expanse of an unlit sky, my 6-year-old hand was undetectable before my face. Disembodied in this darkness, a shrieking chill shivered across my skin, and for the first 2 evenings, this unknown fear pulsed through my veins, and it stole my shut-eye. So as the sun laid down on day 3, she welcomed me to a most unlikely classroom. And she altered my vision for life. 3 days before my late night lesson, Grandma and I boarded a bus in Kansas City. We had 2 bags of clothes, a box of chicken, and a tin of oatmeal cookies en route to her hometown in Arkansas. And as the bus rolled into town, I immediately noticed there were no street lights in Warren, Arkansas. There was nothing to illumine the gravel path that was my grandma's old stomping grounds. And just steps off the bus, I unsuccessfully sought to find my hand. It was blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. I was 6 years old, so after 2 eves of night terrors, Grandma took me out on the porch. Come on, baby. Grandma took me out. Come on, baby. Come on. Grandma took me out on the porch. And she sat me down. It was a single candle on that front porch. It was a shotgun house, and she opened her lecture with these timeless words. Country dark. Country dark is God's gift to your senses. As the sun nestled down for an evening rest, she pulled out an old ice cream maker. And she told me to turn. She told me to turn the crank. Now ice crunched, rock salt crackled, and the dairy tin spun round and round. As I focused on the spinning tin, hypnotically, I entered a time zone of sorts. The hour hand froze. The second hand slowed. The ominous night became luminous. And then her lecture unfolded something like this. Baby, there's some things that you can only experience in the denseness of the dark. What do you feel? She asked. Suddenly a flutter of lightning bugs. Their wings fan my face as they twinkle and twirl before me, and she said, that's God bringing the stars of the heavens down to earth. Listen closely, Greg. Now what do you hear? It was an outdoor symphony. Like frictionless bows gliding across string violins, a chorus of cricket's legs scratched out a most natural tune I was beginning to see and hear in Grandma's classroom. And then she said, stick out your tongue. Stick out your tongue. Your taste buds can see too. That night she taught me how to taste the sweet kiss of coming rain. Then time unfroze. And what seemed to be milliseconds were actually hours. On that porch, my unknown fears melted away. And that night I slept like a newborn. 3 decades later, a pitch black night still smells like homespun ice cream. Today, even in the sweet bliss of distant memory, hard questions sour my nostalgia. Were my childhood fears of darkness baseless? Was the fright lurking behind my undetectable 6-year-old hand, was it learned or was it innate? Have the unknown fears of yesteryear cast shadows on my adulthood vision? If I fail to face my inner lightlessness, come on, listen to this. If I fail to face my inner lightlessness, when I look at the world beyond my prescription frame, do I see through a glass darkly? But the question that burned in me, my brother, was how did Grandma transform a porch into a classroom? How did she create a timeless space where fears became epiphanies? Fear, epiphany. Fear, epiphany. Fear, epiphany. Everybody, just say thank you, Rich. Rich, could you turn up the lights for us? Thank you, Rich. Thank you, my sister. Fear and epiphany. In order to get to this work of creating spaces, I had to go through the long journey of seeking to see and hear the stories of people whose backs have been flung against the wall. And it started with a quote by William James. So it would be unlike me for us to talk about fearless dialogues, but not to dialogue at all. So I need one volunteer. One volunteer. Really quickly, or I'm going to choose somebody. One volunteer. Hey, come on, my brother. Come on, come on. Now, I need you to read with some energy this quote up here. This is a quote by William James, and as you hear it, I want you to listen to your inner teacher. What stands out to you? What phrase jumps out at you? What words make you unsettled? What's your name, my brother?
Khalif Crutcher.
Come on, Khalif. Let's read with some gumption.
No more fiendish punishment could be devised. Were such a thing physically possible, then that one should be turned loose in society and remain absolutely unnoticed by all the members thereof. If no one turned around when we entered, answered when we spoke, or minded what we did, but if every person we met cut us dead.
Let's say those three words again.
Cut us dead.
If every person we met cut us dead. Go ahead, Khalif.
And acted as if we were non-existent things, a kind of rage and impotent despair would before long well up in us, from which the cruelest bodily torture would be a relief.
Thank you, Khalif. No more fiendish punishment could be devised. No more fiendish punishment could be devised than were such a thing physically possible, then that one should be turned loose in society and remain absolutely unnoticed by all the members thereof if no one turned around. If no one turned around when you entered, if no one answered when you spoke or minded what you did, but if every person you met cut you dead and acted as if you were a non-existent thing, a kind of rage, an impotent despair, before long it would well up in you, from which the cruelest bodily torture would be a relief. Let's take 90 seconds in groups of 2 or 3. What stood out to you most? What just did not feel good as you heard these words? What came to mind? Groups of 2 or 3. Let's take 90 seconds. Let's go. Let's go. No more fiendish punishment. Every person you met cut you dead. If no one minded what you said, they paid you no attention when you entered. How must that feel? Kind of rage. Before long, it would well up in you, from which the cruelest bodily torture would be a relief. It would be a relief. I'd rather be beaten than to go unseen. I'd rather be hurt than to go unheard. What does it mean to be cut dead? How must that feel? Have you met somebody like this? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. No more fiendish punishment. 15 seconds. Nobody minded when you entered. Have you felt this way in class before? Has this ever happened to you on the train? Do you feel this in the office or at your church? Have you ever been cut dead? 10 seconds now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time, everybody. It's clear that we want to talk. There's a need to dialogue, okay? Now, really quickly, I can write very quickly. When in your conversations, which words came up? Not necessarily from this page, but which words sprung from your inner teacher? How does it feel to be cut dead? Let's write. Call them out. Say it again. Inhuman. Invisible. Torture. I can write fast. Rage. Demoralizing. Hopeless. Confused. Say it again. Children. Who said that? Why children? Transcultural? Say more. What's your name, my sister? Jones. Now, Jones brings up a very interesting point, right? Because I was doing this research. I started in 2007. This was born out, as Dr. Ray shared, this was born out of my studies at Princeton in my doctoral program when I was a PhD student there. And strangely enough, maybe not strangely enough, I would sit in my carrel and type. And then word got around campus, both at the university and the seminary, that there was this guy who was a good listener. And every now and then he offered some good feedback. And so the students figured out if they bought me a hamburger, they could get a free counseling session. So students were showing up outside of my carrel, and I was just doing these impromptu, conversations with these students, and largely young black males. And so we would have these conversations by day, and then by night, I would travel 41 more miles north of Princeton to Newark. And in Newark, I was working with young men who were coming out of prison. And the thing that became strikingly clear, Jones, is that the young men at Princeton were experiencing some of the same traumas as the young men in Newark. They felt as if they were strategically unseen and unheard. And then I got a good job at Emory. And while I was at Emory, they kind of pushed me out there and said, Greg, go teach about what you're doing in communities. And so I started getting some really interesting invitations, Brother Rivera. And Reggie's heard me say this before. I got an invitation to a college in rural Kansas to talk about young black men. Y'all don't see the humor in that. So I'm in rural Kansas, and they scheduled me to give this lecture on a Friday night, Khalif, on the college campus. Students don't go to lectures, but they definitely don't go on Friday nights, Khalif. And so, I'm in this lecture hall, and I'm surprised because it's full, Khalif, of white senior citizens. Yeah. Of white senior citizens, because there was a senior citizens home right next to the college. But it just wasn't that. As we began to engage in conversation around this research of these young men who felt unseen and unheard, Jones, these elderly folks said, we know exactly what you're talking about, because we feel this every single day. Our kids have tucked us away in these homes, even though we have hopes for our lives, even though we are vibrant human beings, they have put us aside. They have cut us dead. William James made this quote in 1899. He wrote in his book, The Principles of Psychology, that human beings are social cells, and that they have an innate need to be in community. We all know this, just like y'all watch National Geographic. That gazelle that gets separated from the pack has a long day and a short life, right? We have an innate need to be in community. But at the same time, we need to be seen as worthwhile human beings. And so William James, this great psychologist, was using this slang term, cut dead, which literally means to be snubbed completely or deliberately ignored. And so I'm going around and doing these lectures, and people are identifying with this phenomenon. Not only in rural Kansas, I go to Peru with a group of students, and I'm talking to the workers in Peru, and they say, our boss treats us like we are a machine. We are not human. They felt cut dead, and at that moment, I began to recognize, just as you have stated, Jones, that this is a global crisis. It is a universal phenomenon. Now, indeed, I still believe that in America, African American young men are substantially at risk of being cut dead. But everyone experiences this at some point in their life. And so, as I was completing this book, I began to reflect on how we might create spaces to talk about these subjects that are so taboo. How might we engage with persons that are not like us in spaces that value our humanity, that see the gifts in people who are different than them, that hear value in stories, so that we might work collectively towards change? And so, as I'm going around, I recognize that there are some fears that persist when you begin to draw people together around taboo subjects. And so I wrote this as a journal article, Dr. Rector. Sometimes the community work actually does spur meaningful scholarship. So I wrote this article exploring the fears that stifle hard conversation. And it took me into looking at 20th and 21st century mysticism and research on human communications. And these 5 fears became the most prevalent in my study. The first is the fear of the unknown. Could we cut the lights just a little bit? Thank you, Rich. The first is the fear of the unknown. And we'll talk about that fear of the unknown when people are entering into a space that is unfamiliar to them, with people who are unfamiliar to them. They have this reticence of sharing because, 1, I don't want to be perceived as different. 2, I don't want to be perceived as a bigot if I think differently. So how do I move into the fogginess of the unknown space? It happens with great intentionality. You have to create a space where people can bring their whole self and be vulnerable enough to share their most authentic truth. The first key is to see the gift in the person who may not be perceived as gifted. So we had to shift how we thought about the word leader. In our spaces, community leaders are not just people who have paychecks. They're not just people who have titles. Community leaders are not just the gang leaders who run the streets. They are the candy lady at the end of the block who makes sure that all the kids get to school on time. We had to create a space for people who did not feel as if their voice mattered. That helped us to combat the fear of the unknown. The second of the 5 fears is the fear of strangers. My research revealed that there are several strangers in our midst. There's the public stranger that you see as you're walking down the street or in the mall, and you pass them and have not too much account. There is the familiar stranger. Some of you all ride public transportation. The familiar stranger is, we commute in together, and I see these same groups of people every day. And the research by this guy, Stanley Milgram, found that familiar strangers are actually a community. Because when one of the persons that is a mainstay in this community is not there at the same time as they are every day, they are missed. The research also determined that these familiar strangers also evoke imagination. Though we don't share words with each other, I wonder, where are you going to work on your daily commute? What must this person's family be like? And when we begin to think about the familiar strangers in our midst, we can recognize that even though we share a common space and we don't know each other's names, there's possibilities for connection there because they've already been rooted. And they're not only familiar strangers, they're intimate strangers. My father was in the hospital a couple of weeks ago, life-threatening surgery. And in the hospital, there was a cold blue, so there were people running up and down the hallways. And this nurse came in, and she said, "Mr. Ellison, how are you today? It's so good to see you." And then she started talking about how he needed to shave and stuff and just cracking jokes, right? And it made us feel home in a very tense environment. She became an intimate stranger. Chaplains serve this role. Pastors who enter into people's lives and may not know them fully, they serve this role. Professors even serve as intimate strangers. They're strangers in our midst and they're part of our community. But how do we get over the fear? There's also a fear of the strangers within. Think about it. There's strangers among us, but sadly, too many of them lie within. How can we create spaces for people to interact with the strangers around them, the strangers within them? But we also realize there's a fear of appearing ignorant. Everybody is indicted in this one. Jane Vella, an educator, wrote about the fear of appearing ignorant. She said, when you fear appearing ignorant, you fill the space with meaningless words. Are y'all ready for this? Professors who fear being ignorant give long, bleep lectures. I'm in the chapel, so I can't speak like I normally speak, right? Students who fear appearing ignorant write papers that ramble on and on and on. How do you create a space where words are meaningful and not just filling the space? Grandma was teaching me as I did this research. And then there's fear of plopping. Everybody say plop. Plop. Yeah, everybody didn't say it. Come on, y'all. Plop. What does that sound like? What does it sound like? It sounds like water. Just imagine water falling into a puddle from hundreds of feet above. And it says, bloop, right? Now, plopping is a violent act because sometimes we share our truths in community spaces, and after we share our truth, our words just go bloop on the floor. And people look at us like, and they don't say anything. This happened in my first doctoral seminar. Everybody was talking. I figured, shoot, I could say something. I got to admit it. And so 20 minutes into the conversation, I enter into the space. And everybody's face goes blank. And it's like Charlie Brown, womp, 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 womp. And then, after I finish my statement, their faces return to a state of liveliness, and they change the subject as if I had not said a single word, Dr. Sher. And it's violent for two reasons. The first is I had to reconcile with the fact, how can I live in this space if my words are not acknowledged? So now I begin to recoil. Shall I speak again? And risk being cut down, cut dead. But it's also violent to the community because now Miss Cheryl is thinking, if that can happen to Greg, it can happen to me. So how do you create a space that prevents plopping? Finally, there's a fear of oppressive systems. oppressive systems. Oppressive systems dehumanize. They make us feel inhuman and invisible, and they don't recognize our worth. The other thing about an oppressive system is it seems too big to attack as a single person. So out of fear of mobilizing as an individual against an institution, we freeze. We clench our teeth. Right? So the work that we had to think through is how do we create a space where people can believe that small changes chip away at a big problem. These 5 fears became central to the research that I was doing as I began to think about fearless dialogues. So, fearless dialogues is a grassroots organization, and our nonprofit status is coming, right? So it's pending. It's a grassroots initiative that brings together, that creates spaces for unlikely partners to have hard, heartfelt conversations in light of the fears that we've named. We seek to see the gifts in others, hear value in stories, and work for transformation of self and other. These unlikely partners, you ask, who might they be? Everybody is aware of the Zimmerman verdict. God has God's own sense of timing. My book was released in 2013, about 2 months before the Zimmerman verdict. You all will remember that this was pre-Black Lives Matter, but our country was simmering with debate. Conversations were happening around kitchen tables and in classrooms. People were marching the streets with iced teas and Skittles. There was a collective unrest that was brewing. And, you know, strange things happen when you publish a book. You got to be careful because once it got published, somebody said, okay, he's an expert now. and so I was invited to be on several national news sources. And on one of those news sources, I said, I think it's time we have a conversation. So with my dean's permission, I said, let's do this on this date. It just so happened that it was 6 days after the Zimmerman verdict. That same Saturday, people were marching to the state capitol. And some folks said we want to do more than just march. We need a space where we can not only talk about our grievances, but that we could think proactively about how we might create change in the lives of our family and in our community. So 400 people showed up that day. Really? 400? And as I was sharing with my colleagues last night, these were very unlikely partners. Of course, we were at Emory, so there were professors there and students and the dean, and we have a hospital, so the folks from the hospital showed up, Dr. Hogue, right? Well, since 400 people were coming, of course, the police were there. You know, we're talking about black men. But strangely enough, it gets a little more peculiar. Because in addition to those Emory folk, politicians came. And there were judges. And single mothers brought their kids. And there were school teachers and nonprofit leaders. Some factory workers came straight off the line. And there were even drug dealers in the space. Now, how often does that group of people get together? And one of the things that we learned in that space was it was important for us to name the fears. Because the fears are all present in that space. People walk in with a fear of the unknown. They walk in with these preconceptions of their people with titles here that I can't even pronounce. Their letters behind their name. Maybe I won't be valued. We had to name the fear of strangers and the fear of appearing ignorant and the fear of plopping and the fear of this oppressive system of racism. and white supremacy. And then we had to debunk this word fearless. Now, when many of us see the word fearless, we see a root word and a suffix. But I challenge you, as you begin to think about how these conversations are being staged at Garrett and in Evanston, in the YWCA, and in the greater Chicago area, that you encourage people to move forward fearlessly, but not fearless as a root and a suffix. Because if you look at it this way, as a root word and a suffix, less means without. And it is virtually impossible to gather in a space with people who are wholly different than you and to speak your truth without fear. It's impossible. However, if we look at this word as a compound word, it is possible. We acknowledge the fear in the space. We acknowledge the gifts in the room. We acknowledge the value in the stories of people who are different than us. It's possible that as a collective we could muster up the courage and that we could dialogue with less fear. Less fear. And so, as I began to conceptualize how this work might come to be, I began to think of these community conversations as a laboratory. And just like that work, President Rector, of talking about the research about young black men in Kansas, people began to recognize that bedrock is a universal language. We talked about this last night, Brother Reggie. My dear friend and mentor says, Greg, you may not know who you're writing for, but it is possible to know where you're writing, where you're speaking, where you're living from. Right? He's an internationally renowned writer. And his editors say, so who's your audience? I don't know. I know where I'm writing from. I'm an older white man in Wisconsin, and my target population, according to the market analysis, is black women and gay men. It's no way that I could write for that group of people. But I could tell you where I'm writing from. And so we seek to create spaces where people can speak their truth from bedrock. And as our work was initially for having conversations about young black men, people began to gravitate towards bedrock. And so now, in just 2.5 years, we've worked with folks from the Georgia Council of Developmental Disabilities, to corporate boards, to public schools, to gang leaders, a very diverse group of people who have this impetus to speak their truth fearlessly. 6,000 people in 2.5 years. Wow. So we began to construct this laboratory. This laboratory of discovery. And I speak in these stories, you all, because as I've been having this conversation with Dr. Ray for several years now. And the Spirit is leading me to say this. It's not on script. My sense of vocation has been tweaking. I know we're not going to be able to finish, but somebody needs to hear this. My sense of vocation has been tweaking. And I'm not engaging the canonical voices of theology anymore. '20th and 21st century mystics who may not make their way onto syllabi, in seminary classrooms, I'm hearing their wisdom ringing in my ears. But there's also the story of the groundskeeper and the sharecropper and the young man that wears his pants down a little too low for some older folk in my church, and the young lady that wears her skirt a little too high. They have wisdom. And so in this book, I am writing not so much just about the theory that informs the work that I'm doing. I'm seeking to write about the encounters of the people who inform how conversations about hard topics can be broached. Garrett is by far one of the most progressive seminaries in this country. And I recommend students to this seminary. This is not for the lecture, but this is just something that I need to affirm in you all publicly. Every student that comes to me inquiring about doctoral study, I strongly recommend that they apply to Garrett for this reason. Because I believe that you all are wrestling with lived theology. And I am of the mindset, and this research is pulling out of me, that practice is epistemic. By that I mean that as we engage in the work of learning and engaging with the lives of real folk in communities, it informs how we think theoretically. And how we think theoretically informs how we engage in communities. It's an ongoing process. So how do you create a space where jargon that might deter people from conversation is pushed to the side so that we can have hard, heartfelt conversations about subject matters that are real? We created this laboratory. And this laboratory basically drew upon the wisdom of solution-focused brief therapy and asset-based community development and mystical theology to allow people an opportunity to speak their truth. And I'm not sure how I could tie this neatly in a bow. There's a lot of information that I didn't get to, and I welcome questions after the conversation and at lunch. But I want to share this with you. This is the culminating point of creating space for us. We offer what we call the 3 Feet Challenge. And it's a way to mobilize beyond our fear. And I know we got to get out of here at 12:10, so I'm sorry, y'all. I kind of got off script. But maybe this was helpful to somebody. Does everybody have a measuring tape? If you could please stand for me. Some of my greatest lessons happened on porches. My granddaddy would sip strong drink. I would have my lemonade. My grandma taught me about country dark on a porch. She awakened my senses on a porch. I was talking to my Aunt Dottie when I was about 5 or 6 years old, not long after I overcame my fear of country dark. And I asked my my Aunt Dottie how I could change the world. And everybody, just get this 3 feet measuring tape and just see how far that is. You know, just stretch it out around you. Just move, put it at your navel and just stretch it out. You know, you're bumping into some people, right? You're bumping into people. Some of them may be strangers, familiar strangers, but they may be strangers, right? This is 3 feet. And I asked my Aunt Dottie, I said, Aunt Dottie, how can I change the world? 5-year-old, very optimistic. And she said, baby, I don't know how to change the world, but I can change the 3 feet around me. So I issue to you now the 3 feet challenge. How you could create space for change in a very meaningful way. Here's the challenge. We've talked about how it feels inhuman and demoralizing when you're unseen and unheard. My challenge to you is over the next 3 days that you see the people who cross within your 3 feet. Just see 3 people. Hear their story as something valuable. Listen deeply. Engage in fearless dialogue with them. And after you see them and you hear their story, my challenge is that you write their names on this measuring tape. And that you place it in a significant spot in your life as a reminder. Now, this could seem a bit Pollyannish. How can we crack away at this system, this oppressive, dehumanizing system 3 feet at a time? These 3 feet measuring tapes are posted over prison beds. They're lying in the back seats of soccer moms' cars. So when they look back at the baby in the car seat, they see their reminder to see and hear the people within their 3 feet. These are hanging in offices, corporate boardrooms, in bathrooms when you wash and brush your teeth. This is my challenge to you. I end with this one last quote, and I'm sorry, y'all. I went over. You could sit if you would like, or you could stand. It's your choice. At Fearless Dialogues, this work has changed how I live and move in the world. And I've come to live by this mantra. Once you see, you cannot not see. Once you see, you cannot not see. Once you begin to see a homeless man as somebody's uncle or granddaddy or cousin or brother, you can't just step over that human being made in the image of God like a piece of trash because you have seen them. My challenge is for you to see in your classrooms, in your churches, on your daily commutes. God bless you on the journey.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Gregory C. Ellis II, for this very creative and challenging word, a word that not only informs our own thinking about public theology, but a word to our own community, and I think some of the work we need to do here inside our community in terms of having fearless dialogues with each other. So I know that we're a little bit over, but I want to take a moment just to get 1 or 2, maybe 3 questions before we head over to lunch. If you're interested in continuing the conversation with Dr. Ellison, please grab a bite of lunch and we'll see you in the side dining room Are you good for a couple questions?
Sure.
Okay, I'll let you take these.
Questions? Comments? Yeah. 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 One of the tenets of our work is radical hospitality. Not just hospitality that says, "Oh, hi," but many of you all, I greeted at the door. It's not necessarily customary in an academic conversation, right? But like I said, give me your name again, my brother. Sean. Um, Sean, when we do these events in communities, we meet people in the parking lot. Because we recognize that even to take a single small step towards a hard conversation is a meaningful step, right? And so there may be some ways that you could talk about these subjects with your colleagues that some of your minority colleagues might not be able to. Some of the non-Methodist students might not be able to talk about, right? My hope is that you acknowledge even the small steps that people are taking toward conversation and to embrace that as a monumental goal. The beauty of an educational institution is that they're built upon inquiry and the quest to not only understand theory, but hopefully, and I could say this truthfully at Garrett, to stir up within so that people could see anew, right? So to your question about the folks who are not occupying these chairs, sometimes the spaces that you will create for conversation are not in these large environments, but they're in the 3 feet interactions that you have over lunch. You know, as you're packing up to go to your car. And it may be something, one last thing. When I was working in Newark, there's this brother named Majuhaddin. Holy War. That was his name. Majuhaddin sold drugs in City Hall. He was big time. Right? And Majuhaddin said to me, Sean, he said, Brother Greg, I appreciate these past several weeks that we have talked. But I gotta tell you, I got more hustling in me. Right? Because he was transitioning out of prison. So he said, my life is good, dude. I wear a suit and sell drugs. I'm good. Right? And so he said, I got more hustling in me. And I said, Majuhaddin, that is the most honest thing I've heard since I've been working here. And it gave me some hope, Sean, about the people who don't fill the chairs, but that we interact with on a daily basis, right? It put into perspective pedagogical patience, which I believe is a tenet for hope, right? This is how I have hope. He said, I appreciate what we've talked about, but I got more in me. I appreciate it. It was planted. He may be 70 years old talking to his great-grandson, and he'll say, boy, when I was 18 years old, it was this dude that sat and he told me such and such and such. His name was Sean. Our goal is looking long-term. That's how you crack an oppressive system. You can't just look with one march. These conversations that shift generations take time, right? So plant the seed, Sean. And they may not ever come to one of these public lectures, but they will say, I remember this dude, he don't have that long hair anymore. But when I was 19 or 23 or whatever, Sean told me this. You planted the seed and it may take years. And God is cultivating the seed, bringing other people within that person, your colleagues 3 feet, that will water and nurture. That's how I have hope, right? Because otherwise, we need to leave this space because it's starting to affect my language. But otherwise, this could be very despairing. Yes, Miss Ellison. Yeah. The most important people are here. Yeah. Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's all that ever has. Margaret Mead. Let's take one more and then we roll. Anybody else? Oh, God bless you. Thank you, Grandma. Brother Khalif. That's a long response, Khalif. Stories. I speak in encounters now because quoting theories just doesn't do it fully. This book will be copiously footnoted. Indeed. I still have to earn my chops as a professor. But these stories mean more, and people sit with them longer. We were asked to do a fearless dialogue session with the University Board of Trustees. Think about it. Older, very wealthy people. Not a single black face in the room. We're sitting there, Khalif. I only had an hour. This one older white gentleman frowned the entire time. Just scowl, like something smelled bad in the room, Khalif. Just frowning the whole time. But I kept going. Talking about invisibility, muteness, and what it must feel like. Then about 45, 50 minutes into this hour-long talk, his face, his disposition changed. And he decided to say something. This is what he said. Greg, I'm in my late 70s, and I'm a titan in my industry. But I'm recognizing that because I'm getting older, when I say stuff, people don't jump as high as they used to. Older white man. Perhaps I'm becoming invisible. Maybe this is what it must feel like for those young men in Ferguson. 45 minutes, Khalif. An older, white, wealthy, 1%er man is now beginning to imagine and empathize with folks in Ferguson. Tell the story, Khalif. That's it. Tell the story. You got to have the courage to believe that the story counts and that the story has the capacity to shift, right? What does it look like if this guy who has control over this titan of a business, this Fortune 100 business, begins to see black men slightly differently? Does his hiring practices change? Does he talk with his board differently? Does he begin to see that, yeah, this might not happen in my lifetime, but I'll tell my grandson about it, the one who will inherit? You also got to be willing to be cut dead yourself. Literally. Let's have lunch.